From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Farmers face important decisions.
It would be $240 an acre just for the nitrogen.
With input costs rising, what should they grow? And how much should they produce?
They're looking at the cost picture. They're looking at higher feed prices. They're looking at relatively high fuel prices right now.
All factors as USDA releases its highly anticipated prospective plantings report.
We certainly were surprised by the extent of the change.
The numbers move the markets right now on AgDay. Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. USDA says that 2022 is the year that soybeans will be king. The agency releasing its prospective plantings report. The markets reacting by pushing corn and wheat further up while soybeans moved in the opposite direction. Let's get straight to the numbers. And the big shocker, the corn acres. USDA predicting 89.5 million acres of corn will be planted. That's down 4% from last year and much lower than the trade had predicted. Instead, those acres will go into soybeans at 91 million acres predicted, up 4% from 2021. For wheat, 47.4 million acres. That's up 1% from last year. Now, if that number is realized, USDA says it would be the fifth lowest all wheat planted area since records began back in 1919. Cotton coming in higher as well at 12.2 million acres, up 9% from last year.
After USDA's numbers are all said and done, we've got this corn market really looking at this idea of much tighter than expected supplies and certainly reinvigorating this talk about spring supplies up ahead, certainly for the soybeans. A little bit of a trade surprise on this one here.
We have to have a record 180 bushel yield, and at that point we only have a 1.1 carryover. So if we start having something like a weather problem and we're looking at a near record yield or a yield bigger than last year,
the production efficiency, because as we are seeing an expansion of acreage, we also have to consider there's a possibility of decreasing in per acre yield. And if that is the case, then it will eventually harm farm profitability and revenue like in the next market year.
And what's still in the bin from last year is also factoring into all of this. Corn stocks coming in at 7.85 billion bushels. That's a bit below what the trade had expected, but up 2% from the same time last year. Soybeans at almost 1.9 billion bushels, a little higher than the trade guess. That's up 24% from last year, while wheat is just over 1 billion bushels, down 22% from 2021, also below what the trade had anticipated.
When you look at the massive amount of beans on farm, 750 million bushel on farm compared to 594 a year ago, and 1.1 billion in the commercial storage versus under a billion, 960 last year. That's kind of makes your knees buckle just a little bit. But putting that into perspective, the trade was estimating a 340 million bushel increase. And with that number that we were anticipating, we've been trading a carryover number of old crop at 285. So typically you'd see this stocks report and you would add the difference of what we received and what we were expecting from USDA onto or subtract from the carryover. When you put it into that perspective, you're really only talking about 28 million bushel.
Commodity and input prices have seen a dramatic change since the USDA survey was done at the beginning of March. And if farmers decide to switch acres last minute, finding the necessary inputs may be the biggest hurdle this year. A recent Farm Journal survey of ag retailers found herbicide is in the shortest supply, with 85% of those surveyed saying they've had difficulty sourcing it for 2022. The second biggest issue is fungicide, followed by fertilizer and insecticide. Now, one Iowa farmer telling Farm Journal that she has a field where she's still weighing what to plant, and she just spoke to her local retailer to see if she plants corn, if there's enough nitrogen available and at what price.
Well, I paid 30 cents a unit, for the last year's. This year I booked in August and it was 64 cents and now it's over $1. So it's gone up that much. And to do corn on that field, it would be $240 an acre just for the nitrogen. And so I go, I'm gonna have to get a pencil to this. And you know what? It's still paid, not by much, to do corn on corn rather than corn on beans. But
Nahima says she needs to see an average corn yield of 210 bushels per acre this year to cover the increase in input costs, which is higher than her historic farm average. And we want to hear from you about your planting intentions. Do they align with what USDA has just announced? Take our simple online poll by heading over to agweb.com and clicking on the prospective planting story. Severe storms with tornadoes and high winds raced across the deep south, killing 2 people in the Florida Panhandle and leaving scattered damage to buildings and homes in their path. Now, the storm front spanned several states, with high winds overturning semi-trailers in Louisiana and toppling large trees in Mississippi. Meanwhile, wildfires are continuing to be an issue in other parts of the country, with the National Interagency Fire Center reporting more than 14,000 separate wildfires that have scorched more than 500,000 acres as of this week. Many of them are burning in Colorado and Texas. Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik is here, and Matt, those dry conditions persist across a good chunk of the country.
Yeah, that's right, Clinton. And we're going to start with the drought monitor back a couple of weeks ago. And you can really see from 4 weeks ago, still a ton of drought. This has persisted over the last season or two, really, the last few months. And as we look at that through really the west, all the way through parts of Texas and all of that. But fast forward until now, heading 3 weeks ago, now 2 weeks ago, and eventually up until now. You can actually see where things have gotten just a little bit drier in parts of Oklahoma, parts of Texas as well. We've even got extreme drought conditions now in southern parts of Louisiana, and still abnormally dry spots along the Gulf Coast into the southeast and Florida as well. And if we look at that precip outlook for April, it's going to be pretty dry, below normal through the Four Corners region, up into the Central Plains and even along the Gulf Coast. Meanwhile, more precip above normal is expected through the Pacific Northwest and in parts of the Ohio Valley, interior parts of New England, as well as the Great Lakes. And a beautiful sight in the skies over North Dakota this week, a trooper with the North Dakota Highway Patrol capturing the amazing northern lights in action. This photo was taken north of Crosby near Long Creek, North Dakota. A spectacular scene for sure. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
In an effort to try and control energy prices, President Biden announcing Thursday the release of 1 million barrels of oil per day from the nation's Strategic Petroleum Reserve for 6 months. Now, prices have spiked as the U.S. and its allies have imposed sanctions on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. The president also calling on Congress to impose financial penalties on oil and gas companies that lease public lands but aren't producing energy. And what about adding more ethanol into the mix? Reuters reporting the Biden administration is also considering temporarily removing restrictions on summer sales of higher ethanol gas blends. The EPA, in response to the rumor, said it was considering a range of options. The summertime ban on E15 was imposed over concerns that it contributes to smog in hot weather, but research has shown that may not be the case. Easter egg supplies could be at risk due to the expanding outbreak of high-path avian influenza. Analysts with CoBank say outbreaks and depopulation within the U.S. layer flock are adding stress to egg supply chains, many of which haven't fully recovered from the disruptions caused by COVID. Now, CoBank says at least 11 million layers have been lost in recent weeks, with USDA adding in new cases almost daily. The most recent USDA weekly shell egg demand indicator shows about 5 days of inventory are currently on hand, which normally suggests a tight but not alarmingly tight supply. However, the report doesn't think that supplies can keep up with the reduction in layers, especially regionally. They say expect to pay more for eggs this Easter. And Iowa ag officials are reporting 2 more outbreaks in commercial flocks. It will require the killing of more than 1.5 million hens and turkeys. The chickens are at an egg-laying farm in Guthrie County, about 60 miles west of Des Moines. The other, a turkey farm in Hamilton County, about 65 miles north of Des Moines. There are also new cases in North Carolina, Wyoming, North Dakota, Ohio, and Massachusetts. Still ahead, we take a deep dive into those new numbers from USDA and what we need to focus on going forward. And later, Pink Floyd spotted not on the dark side of the moon, but along the Texas Gulf Coast. In the country. On the financial front, an inflation gauge closely monitored by the Federal Reserve jumped 6.4% in February compared with a year ago. Now, that's thanks to sharply higher prices for food, gas, and other necessities. The figure comes from the Commerce Department and was the largest year-over-year rise since January of 1982. And more Americans applied for unemployment benefits last week, but layoffs remain at historic lows. Jobless claims rose by 14,000 to 202,000. We're joined once again by Rich Nelson. He's the chief strategist with Allendale. As we talk about this report, and obviously we've been waiting on these numbers and expectations from USDA. It's kind of one of those reports that we count on every year. But where do we go from here now that they're in?
You know, as far as pricing action, this is a real big concern here. We have the smallest plantings, I want to say, go back since 2018 on the corn end. This is even before we start talking about some concerns about yields. So the market was already trading in on its own pricing, not USDA, a 1.1 billion bushel crop in terms of pricing. Now we're talking about sub 1 billion bushel stocks if these numbers do hold. Now for soybeans, this does give us a little cushion in that supply argument that we've been hearing here these past few weeks.
As we look at everything going on in the world, what do these numbers tell us about what's possible as we go into the next couple of months?
You know, the concerning issue is this implies that if our own farmers are cutting back a little more than expected on the corn end, perhaps that may be seen in other plantings around the world. So this does certainly recharge this argument that if we're not going to get Ukraine planted on time, which is certainly not going to be the case at this point, we're going to have a market which you're going to have to price in some very sharp supplies of corn, certainly these next few months.
Obviously, wheat in that Russia-Ukraine, Black Sea region, a big question mark at this point, whether it will end up in the world market. How much does this drive spring wheat acres here going forward in the U.S.?
And that had been a real big question. USDA revised down their previous estimate on winter wheat plantings here in the U.S. And on top of that, they told us as far as other spring plantings, actually a net decline. So the trade was expecting a moderate 400,000 acre increase. Now we actually see a decline. So this wheat argument certainly not getting any help from these numbers today.
All right, Rich, sure appreciate the insights as always. Thank you much for joining us here on Ag Day. We'll be back with more coming up in just a minute.
To talk to Rich Nelson one-on-one, call 800-262-7538. The 2022 Bracket Busters Challenge, presented by Case IH, is underway. Who's still in the game? To find out, head to AgWeb now through April 4th to check the leaderboard.
Meteorologist Matt Urisovic joining us here. And Matt, as we wrap up the month of March, kind of an interesting statistic we heard that there were the most tornadoes for the month of March since 1950 with more than 200.
Oh yeah, and that's crazy. That means that we've had a lot of systems moving their way on through with all of that kind of severe weather. And you would think with all of those systems we'd have a lot of rain, but we're still in a pretty drought-stricken area there through the center of the country and back towards the Pacific coast as well. And a lot of that moisture that was associated with all of those storms fell really from the Mississippi River up through the Ohio Valley and over in these regions where we don't see any drought conditions. But we've still got some of those abnormally dry spots again across the east, even down towards Florida. But we're still looking at a very vast area, especially in Oklahoma and Texas, of extreme to exceptional drought conditions, and still seeing some of that over the Cascades and in the San Joaquin Valley out there as well. So still very dry out in the west, and it looks like, again, from earlier in the show, we talked about that outlook. It is going to remain pretty dry through much of April in a lot of these locations. And there's one spot zooming in on Texas, and you've even got some extreme conditions for drought there in southern parts of Louisiana. And again, this is pretty much persisted or gotten a little bit worse depending on your location if you are in Texas or Oklahoma. Louisiana, or even New Mexico as well. So taking a look at our map here as we head through the day on Friday, we've got that front produced all that severe weather moving off of the East Coast, high pressure replacing it, but a chilly high pressure. We've got some rain and snow showers across the Great Lakes and into the mid-Atlantic states, and then a little bit of higher elevation snow moving across parts of the Rockies. That system is going to move out eventually, but most of the region, most of the country dealing with that high pressure system. Eventually these rain showers move eastward, bringing some snow again to the north, and eventually some rain moving into parts of the Great Lakes and the mid-Atlantic, and more rain coming in and heading through Saturday evening into Florida. So taking a look at the snowfall, there could be a little bit of that, especially in the higher elevations of the Rockies and north. We're talking North Dakota up into northern Minnesota and Wisconsin as we head through the next couple of days. But over the next 10 days, starts out pretty dry, and then we do end up seeing a couple more systems in the east, which could bring a lot more precipitation there. Meanwhile, still in those drought conditions back in the west. That's a look around the country. Now let's take a look at the weather where you live. Syracuse, New York, morning showers with afternoon rain and snow showers, a high of 43 degrees. Lots of sunshine and staying mild in Pine Bluff, Arkansas with a high of 65, and a chance of rain and snow showers, a high of 51 in Brewster, Nebraska.
The USDA didn't just release grain numbers this week. The quarterly hogs and pigs report is out as well. We'll have those numbers next. And later, authorities are giving a pass to a fugitive seen living in Texas. How Pink Floyd, the flamingo, ended up in paradise in the country.
AgDay is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer.
Right now, the U.S. hog inventory is down, and experts say the trend may likely last through the end of this year and into early next. As of March 1st, USDA says there were 72.2 million hogs and pigs on U.S. farms. That's down 2% from March of last year and down 3% from December. 6.1 million of the current hogs were kept for breeding. That's also down 2% from a year ago. Experts say it appears that producers are proceeding with caution.
They're looking at the cost picture. They're looking at higher feed prices. They're looking at relatively high fuel prices right now. I mean, their costs are up there, and that's probably, despite the fact that you're looking at fairly good hog prices, they're a little bit reticent to begin expanding under those circumstances.
Now, one market watcher saying the news is bullish because the numbers came in well below estimates, especially the downward revision of the breeding herd from December and the decline in the March 1st breeding inventory. California is battling severe drought, and now it's proposing paying farmers $2.9 billion to cut back on planting. A voluntary agreement was negotiated between government officials and the state's major water agencies. The goal is to protect salmon and other wildlife resources. Now, farmers in the state's Central Valley have been struggling with water issues. This agreement could leave as much as 35,000 acres of rice unplanted in the state's northern Central Valley. Speaking of water, up next, a fugitive bird enjoying the sunshine along the Gulf Coast. That flamingo spotted in Texas. Details next. A former jailbird is living his best life as a free bird. In the natural waterways on the Gulf Coast of Texas, spotting wild birds doing their thing is no big thing unless the feathered fowl in question is a famous fugitive that's been on the run for 17 years. Now, video shot by an environmental activist and shared by Texas Parks and Wildlife officials is purported to show Pink Floyd, a flamingo that famously flew the coop from a Kansas zoo back in 2005. The flamingo's ID was reportedly confirmed by its numbered leg band.
Might be a little awkward getting off the ground, but they can fly like 35 miles an hour and travel, over 350 miles. As long as there's plenty of food, no predators, he's doing real well.
Animal experts say flamingos can be quite resilient in their natural habitats, and some can live as long as 50 years. There are no plans to recapture the flamingo. Officials seem comfortably numb about his fugitive status, so Pink Floyd will continue to enjoy his pretty comfortable gig on the coast. And that's all of our time this morning. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day out in farm country.